are back with Stephen M. Plym. You remember him from our episode about Mr. Plym and Tiny Tim? And our guest that night was Vince Russo. And because of that show, Mr. Plym, we have had such a response. You don't even know, brother. We have set such a response to bring you back. We had to do it all over again.
I appreciate
Joining me down this journey down the show business rabbit hole is my cohort, my co-host, my partner in crime, a man who I love like a brother from another mother. I got two brothers from other mothers here tonight. Dan, the man, Sebastiano, the happy haberdasher. How you doing, brother?
Good, Angelo. Looking forward to another good talk. Stephen, we had a lot of fun talking to him last time, so should be great.
Yeah, I wanted Stephen to come back to talk about Stephen Plym, agent, manager, Hollywood Renaissance guy. I want all the juice. I want to know what goes on behind the scenes. Uh-oh. But before we bring Stephen in, we got to talk about a couple things that transpired on the show recently. Dominic DeNucci's episode has garnered a lot of attention. People are saying that our interview with Dominic was among the best, if not the best interview with Dominic they've ever heard. And I'll show you, I'm going to put them up on our Facebook group. And I was like, I almost brought the tears on that one. That was like really touching that people thought that we were that, true to Dominic. The other thing is I was given a piece of information today, Dan, that I shared with you, and we need to address this because we did address this on our episode with Vince Russo and Mike Williams, along with our former partner here, Mike Messier, the director, filmmaker. The issue in question is whether or not George Floyd, the resident of Detroit, was killed as a result of police brutality, or whether there was some other nefarious actions at work. I shared with you. Well, why don't you just go ahead and share with the audience what I shared with you?
Not to correct you, you said Detroit. George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis.
I'm sorry, Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm sorry.
The reason this came to our attention because Sam Houston, friend of the show, posted the link up. Not to call anybody out, but the narrative that's being floated that's come from the defense team is they're going to argue, and exactly what Mike Williams said he expected was the defense team's going to argue that due to the drugs in his system, he suffered basically a heart attack and an overdose-induced heart attack, regardless of the choke that was applied.
Yeah, and that was important because we addressed George Floyd's death directly on our show, keeping in mind, and I make this disclaimer legally, keeping in mind the information we used that was provided to us was current as of the time of the recording of that show.
Correct.
The information we have today is not our information. I want to be very clear to say that it is not our information. It comes, as Dan said, by way of Michael Sam Houston, better known as Sam Houston, a professional wrestler of some 30 years, a friend of the show. He's been here twice already. He's a friend of mine personally. I know him and I like him. And he's a straight up guy. Go ahead.
And I was going to say the article in question was published, I believe, yesterday from the Washington Sentinel, which is while right leaning, hardly it's a respected journalistic enterprise.
Yes, absolutely. But we need to make sure that we caveat this by saying it is not our information. It was brought to our attention, and in the interest of full disclosure, we are sharing it with the public. That being said, Dan, introduce our guest of the evening.
Well, we touched on it in your intro. Stephen Plym, author, booker, producer, agent, madman of many sorts, Mad Hatter, I should say, man of many hats. we could spend an hour show just covering an introduction, but I think
Shit.
he was Steven came to the show. His book, Tiny Tim and Mr. Plym, which was his adventures and time as manager of legendary musician Tiny Tim, brought Vince Russo. You mentioned you wanted to touch more on, obviously we could continue talking about the book, but there was so much more to his life as far as agenting and various other facets that we want to get into. And that's why he's here. We're going to touch on, as you said, agenting 101, basically.
Absolutely. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk more about Steven and less about Tiny Tim is, quite frankly, Steven, Vince Russo was going to blow you up with questions about Tiny Tim.
I liked him a lot.
I should point out to everybody, I spoke to Vince Russo today. I invited him to appear on the show tonight. He has a very full plate. He's actually recording his show tonight for broadcast tomorrow. And he's got, as everyone knows, Vince has right now 13 different shows on his network that require his attention. So Wrestling with the Future is certainly not at the top of his priority list. But Steven Plym is at the top of our priority list tonight. Steven, welcome back. How you doing?
Thank you guys for having me. It's a pleasure being here. And I loved Vince. He was great.
Yeah, and I told him that too. By the way, he, as I promised, and just I want Dan to know I'm a man of my word, I promised to send Vince Russo Steven's book, and I did, along with Wrestling with the Future T-shirts, which he will wear. He says he will. So, oh, speaking of which, not to change the subject, but thank you. Shout out to Stephen Bonner. Right on, brother. Great shirt. I like that shirt you're wearing. Stephen Bonner, of course, former UFC champion, MMA fighter, just amazing legend in MMA, sporting a Wrestling with the Future T-shirt. And I spoke to Stephen, and he will be back on the show in about 3 weeks.
Awesome.
Just as soon as he gets back from Dubai.
There you go.
If they let him back. No. He'll be back. So, Steven.
Yeah.
In it, let's talk about, in as much as you handled Tiny Tim for 5 years, but you were his friend for 25 years. Let's get into a little bit of your duties. You jokingly heard me say, I mean, yeah, I mean, did I say that right, Dan? Jokingly heard me say?
Yes.
On the last episode that you were his agent, manager, food order taker, the guy that tucked him in bed at night. And with Tiny Tim, probably most of that was true, although I exaggerated. Tell me what you do as an agent, as a manager, and what is the difference? Let's first of all decipher and declare the difference between what an agent is and what a manager is. Go ahead.
That's a great question, because most people don't know, okay? An agent is a person that knows the entertainment business, okay, and does it for a living, but he acquires jobs, work for his client. That's his function. Book me here, book me there, get paid, get your 10 or 15%, make sure I have as much work as I can possibly get. It's simply getting the artist jobs. Management is a whole different shake of the stick. That entails directing the guy's career. From anything, press releases, working with agents, okay? Because many managers like myself, and I used to be an agent, but you always aspire to be a manager, okay? You always aspire to that. I'm a personal manager. That's like the top of the heap for us guys, right? And I'm not an agent anymore. But you deal with agents 24 hours a day. A myriad of agents for your clients. Unless I, as a manager, sign one of my talents exclusively with an agency. And then that's it. They do the job. However, we communicate all day long. What they do for the manager is they bring us, it's called offers. I'm sure you understand that. Offers.
Actually, Steven, can I stop you there? Because I understand that and Dan understands that. But there are a number of ways to interpret what an offer is, and you and I both know that, having been in the business. There are people who will make an offer, and there will people who will bring an offer. Explain to people the difference between making an offer and bringing an offer.
You can bring me an offer on the phone and say X amount of dollars, this, that, and that, and we meet your rider requirements, what have you.
Right.
As you brought me an offer. You're gonna make me an offer? That's solid. Make me an offer on the phone. Fax that over to me right away. This is solid. This is your word. This is the offer from your buyer. And we're going to go with that. Now, I take it to my artist. I 9 times out of 10 already know whether we're going to accept it or not, but you don't accept right away. It's just, you don't do that. Okay.
Stephen, how often do you get somebody who says, okay, Mr. Plym, you've got carte blanche. You field the offers, accept them. You will just get me work, get me booked, get me paid, get me work. You've got carte blanche. How many clients have you had? I mean, other than Tiny, who I can't see Tiny really arguing with anyone. Because he trusted you implicitly, Stephen. He really, really did. But let's say you have an artist that's just like, who quite frankly doesn't give a shit and says, okay, just you handle it. I don't want to be bothered with the business. You handle it.
It runs that way, or perhaps you have a really good relationship with your artist. You've worked with them for a while. They believe in you, and they give you power of attorney. Okay? That means that on any phone call, if I like the deal, I'm accepting it solidly right now. It's just like the artist speaking. I don't have to bring him the offer, go over all the details, and then I always suggest, I think we should take this. Or here's why I don't think that we should take this. Or we're in agreement to take it, but there needs to be a little tweaking here in the writer or this or that, and then it'll be fine. So you go back to the agent or the buyer, if he's calling you direct, and you negotiate, just like anything else in business. You negotiate. My job is to get the best deal for my client as a manager. I'm fighting a guy, the agent, okay, if I'm working with an agent and I'm a manager, he's fighting actually for the buyer, because he's going to work with that buyer many times a year. He wants to get the buyer the best deal he can to look as good as he can, so he can keep dealing with them. My best interest and my artist's best interest is not the agent's. They'll say it is. Okay. Hey, baby, I love you. I got you a great gig. Wait till you hear this. Oh, my God, you're going to love it. And we got you this, and we got you that. Okay. They embellish it as much as they possibly can, because they want to sell it to their buyer, be in good with their buyer for the future, and get their commission. Okay. And we all know how the game's played.
Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah. Well, then let me ask you to expand on that, because you talked about bringing the offers and the manager and the agent. How often then do the manager and the agent have to work together, and how often do their interests conflict?
Well, there's always a conflict between an agent and a manager, because we both have two different functions, and we're looking at the deal from two different perspectives, as I just mentioned. But the nice thing, if you've been in the business a long time, like I have, you develop relationships with agents because you've worked with them so long, and now you develop it. Okay, where I know I can trust this guy because he's always come through for me. He's not going to bust my balls. He's not going to lie to me. We have a deal going. The problem is when you work with a brand new guy, you don't know his background, so you have to question everything. Okay.
Well,
Stephen, following up on what Dan just, and I'm going to throw it back to Dan in just a second, but following up on what Dan just talked about, what's the difference between a buyer, and I've heard this term used and I never understood it. What's the difference between a buyer and a broker?
Oh, okay. And I've done both, because I've owned nightclubs myself also. I was a buyer. Okay, a broker, and I've done that. I've brokered deals, just like a real estate thing, okay? You're not on either side. A buyer may call you and say, gee, Steve, I've got this big deal coming up. He tells me, oh, here's how many seats, here's what it's for, here's my budget. Find me something that fits my needs. Okay?
Stephen, is the broker status largely, like Switzerland? Is it neutral? Like, what's the vested interest? Is it just a payday? Like someone, like a buyer, I'm assuming a buyer has a vested interest in dealing with particular agents and managers, right?
Yeah.
Because they get a piece of. I'm assuming they get a piece of that, right? Whereas a broker, no, okay, smarten us up.
What did you say again? What was that question?
The idea or the notion that a broker is neutral, right?
Uh-huh.
They get paid a flat fee, or do they have a vested interest?
No, they get paid. No, I'm sorry. They get paid a flat fee for bringing two entities together, and that fee is discussed up front.
Okay, that's what you went exactly where I was hoping you'd go.
Yeah.
Because my understanding is that a broker has a vested interest in the client, right?
Well, it could go either way, okay? Or it could be neutral, like you said. Like usually a broker, right, deals with agents and buyers, right? And they come to the broker because he has a good reputation and knows the business, right, and how to put deals together quickly between a buyer and an agent, or a buyer and an artist manager. So
give me
usually
an example.
A broker will have, an example. The Fountain Blue in Miami Beach, right, is looking for X type of an act. He's having no luck, or he's not satisfied. He knows a broker, or he knows me, and I'm brokering deals, right? He calls me, he says, Plym, here's what I'm looking for. Here's my budget. Put this to bed for me, will you? I'm tired of working with this crap, right? Right. I said, okay. What's the budget on the thing? Let's say it's $50,000. Okay. I want 10 grand. It'll be included in the deposit. There's my fee. Is that okay with you? Yeah. I go to the artist or the manager and I tell him the same thing. What do you need? Here's the offer. It's 50 grand. I'm putting 10 on top for me to get the deal done. Okay with you? It's all up front.
Okay. Go ahead, Dan.
Well, then let me ask you, let's kind of talk about the whole process then. If I'm, hypothetically speaking, let's say I'm a musician and there's a particular club or venue that I want to play. Who from start to finish, who goes through that process, from the guy who owns the nightclub to the artist themselves that's involved in that process of booking him that for a show?
An artist wants to play a certain venue, he'll tell his agent, and he expects his agent to get him the gig. It's that simple. So
does the agent reach out to then the brokers, or does the agent reach out to the person who owns the club?
He'll reach out to the person that owns the club first. And almost always. He'll call him directly. And whether he's been a client before or not, he'll pitch him his artist.
Stephen, okay. I have heard horror stories of artists dealing direct with concert and show promoters. Should an artist ever deal with a promoter themselves, or should they always be represented?
Well, it's like the old saying with a lawyer representing himself is not a good deal, right?
Right.
The best way
for a client. Fool for a client, yeah.
Yeah. The best way is to always be represented. It's hard to sell yourself and brag about yourself and say how wonderful you are and what you're going to do. It sounds so damn self-serving. You need an agent to do the job for you. However, that happens where an artist will go directly to a club. Maybe he knows the guy, or he knows another artist that played there and he was recommended to call him. And now you got a little three-way thing going here, right? Yeah. And that's cool. It's all legal. But I'm telling you, 90% of the time, it's not good to represent yourself unless in specific situations.
Well, speaking of representation, then, what's more likely for a manager to have one client that he specifically works with, or an agent to have one client that he specifically works with?
Good
An
one,
agent
Dan.
will have
Thank you.
many. An agent will have many clients. He can't live off one artist. Okay. A manager can.
Unless your name is Colonel Tom Parker and your client is
Exactly.
Elvis Presley.
Oh, I am so glad. Hey, guys, can I tell you a quick story on that? You said Colonel Parker.
Yes,
Oh,
sir.
absolutely.
Dig this, man. This is funny. I fell off my chair when I heard this. Okay, when Elvis, was the biggest thing in the world, right? And he was going, and Colonel Parker was known to be a ferocious lion to deal with. Brutal. No gloves on, baby, right? So the story goes like this. I wasn't there, but I talked to a guy that was there. He told me the story. Okay, when Presley went to make his first movie, his very first movie, all the executives are gathered in the room around a big table. I think it was Columbia. I forget who it was. Okay.
It was Paramount Pictures and it was Love Me Tender. And I know the story. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. Anyway, they're all sitting around nervous as hell because they're going to meet with the colonel to negotiate a deal. You already know it, don't you, Angela?
Oh, boy.
They're going to make a deal.
Keep shut.
And everybody's nervous about who's going to speak first and what are we going to offer the colonel because he's such a hard ass, right? And they don't want to piss him off and take it somewhere else. So they're all sitting around fidgeting. The meeting, long story short, the meeting comes to order. And finally, one of these suits says, well, Colonel, what do you think about 100,000? The guy said, the colonel took a great big drag of his cigar and he said, that's fine for me. What about the boy?
It's exactly what he said.
Is that great?
And that was the beginning of the first $1 million contract in the film business. Elvis got $1 million and Colonel Parker got $250 for himself.
Wow. You know
Two
more
and
about
a half for himself.
Wow. Great.
Elvis got $1 million a picture from Love Me Tender to
Jailhouse Rock.
The last one he got $1 million for was called Charo.
I remember that.
And then it went up from there.
Anyway, I thought that was a great story about the colonel.
It's great. It is, and that's absolutely true. That every word of that was true.
I'm glad.
Go ahead, Dan.
Well, then let me have you. That is funny. Let me have you expand because I was asking about. Obviously, you said managers are more likely to be singles. Then, how does that come about in the sense of? You mentioned obviously you were telling us in the last show that when you took over as managing duties for Tiny Tim, how often is it to have a manager that's somebody like a Colonel, like a Parker, who's with you your whole career? Whereas some people will 3, 4, 5 managers deep, X number of years in.
Most artists change managers several times in their career until they find the one. Okay. And, I mean, there have been others like Colonel, Chubby Checker's manager. I forget his name. He only managed Chubby Checker and they made a deal. You sing, I'll do the business, 50-50 split.
His name was Bob Narducci.
Yes.
From Philadelphia.
Yeah.
I know because I knew Chubby Checker for a while. Don't forget, Stephen, I only did 2 things in my life. Wrestling and music. That's all I ever did.
Well, I got one of them. That's all I've ever done.
But along those lines, and thank you, Dan. It's a great segue into this. You were Tiny Tim's friend first.
Yes.
Which went a long way for you being Tiny's manager. And even at that point when you said to Tiny, okay, I'm going to handle your career now, that took him by surprise. Wouldn't it have been a natural fit from the jump for you to take Tiny and guide his career? You saw what other guys were doing to him. They were bastardizing his career, Stephen.
Yes, but at that time, to digress for a minute, I met Tiny Tim when I was 21 years old.
Right.
That was my first booking with him. I was a young agent, okay? And I had several, as they call, lounge groups, probably 70 or 80 lounge groups. That's what I was doing. And they go around the country, to Ramada Inns, Holiday Inns, different venues and play. And that's how I made a living, right? 10% from all of them, book the hell out of them, work all, and then you graduate up. So after that first meeting with Tiny, we became friends. We exchanged numbers, we talked, we laughed. I was 21 years old, okay? I was not in that league yet. I wasn't.
Yeah.
So all those years that we knew each other, we would meet, talk, and as I went up the ladder, right, then I would hire Tiny myself for my own promotions and productions. I used to do NFL celebrity shows. I would use the Chicago Bears, the Minnesota Vikings, Dallas Cowboys, and so forth on their off season, or alumni guys, and I would promote family shows, and I would couple it up with the police department in each city.
Yeah.
So it's a variety show, fill the auditorium, the cops are playing the Vikings, novelty, what a show, right? But then I would always hire what I'd call a special guest or guest host to help sell tickets. He would show up and just shake hands and say, hi, and I'm here. That is how I started with Tiny to graduate our friendship, because I would hire him many NFL shows, and he loved it.
Stephen, how long did it take you to become comfortable in your skin as an agent well, forget about agent first, as a promoter? And I can tell you, and Dan knows this, I've said this many times before, a lot of the guests who come on this show have paralleled my career as well. Because I started out as a DJ, and I managed and promoted rock and roll bands. That was what I did. And then I became a sound engineer. And you know what it's like working with bands. They can be very temperamental. Yeah. They can be, sometimes the infighting in a band will kill a band before they ever get booked.
Oh, almost 90% of them, man.
Exactly.
90% of them coming up, and they all, I'm going to do this, I can follow direction, blah, 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 blah. And the longer they're together, then the infighting. I wanted to play that song. I think we should do this. Oh my God. It's babysitting every day. You pull your hair out.
And that's what we're going to talk about. You went right there, Stephen. How long did you find, I mean, how much of this, I'm going to rephrase my question. How much of this did you take before you refined your skills and felt comfortable in your own skin, that you felt confident enough that you could do effectively justice for your client?
Well, I had a couple experiences, but however, I would say, to be direct, 83, 84, when I moved to New York City.
Okay. And now, was that because it was trial by fire, Stephen?
Well, no. I mean, I've had a couple acts that are not mentioned in the book or anything like that, but really got my personal career fired up. And one of them was, maybe you'll remember, a little girl, 10 years old, named Carrie McDowell. She was singing.
Yeah.
I found her in Des Moines, Iowa, through a friend that had a TV show at the time, long story short, right?
Yeah.
And we put together a band, all kids. This is when the Jackson 5 and the Osmonds were hot, right?
Yeah.
So I was the entertainment director at a major hotel here, as well as doing my own stuff. And I would bring in big shows. And finally, the guy comes to me and he goes, you know what? I want to do a thing like the Jackson 5 or the Osmonds. I looked at him like he was nuts. I said, what? We went out and had about 10 martinis, and he talked me into it.
I'll share a little story with you. This is interesting because this story crosses over from the music world to the wrestling world. The particular gentleman that I will mention will be a guest on the show. He's a very dear friend of mine, personal friend of mine. His name is Rob Russin. Rob Russin discovered the first, this is straight shoot, Stephen, you can check it out, the first Elvis tribute artist.
Oh.
The first one. Okay. Now, interestingly enough, and Dan will know this, Rob Russin also discovered a guy that became well known in wrestling named Diamond Dallas Page. Okay?
Okay.
Diamond Dallas Page is former world champion. But here's the thing. Rob Russin was an interesting cat because he had this approach to promoting his artist that was kind of like, I want to say, like, it wasn't like the Colonel where he was like a bulldog, but he was what's, I would say, Dan, like a passive aggressive kind of personality. Like he was real good at like guilting his clients into shit. You know what I mean? You know where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
Okay. He's a guy like that. And that's just the truth. I mean, that's just the way. But Rob's a great guy, and he's very, very good at what he does. But are there different? I'm sure there are. Like there are artists. Are there different personalities that work for being a manager or agent, or that you have to have like, you know, brass cojones to do this job?
Well, you've got to have a lot of miles under your ass before you go into management. Okay. I'm just saying that's a straight shooting thing, right?
Yeah.
It's easy to say I'm a manager. And you know how many people are in the pseudo entertainment business and they got a little band. This is my manager.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'm George Burns. Give me a break. You know what I mean? You got to be there, pay your dues, make your connections, get shot down, pick yourself back up and learn. You know, it's PhD, man. It's, you know, an MBA in the business, and there's no school for it. You just do it. And if you last long enough, if you're lucky to last long enough, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you can come about.
Steven, did Tiny Tim understand how much money he ever made?
From time to time. Tiny was the worst businessman in the world, you know.
He had to have made multiple millions upon millions of dollars, Steven.
Yeah, he did. His first big payday was right after Tiptoe at Caesars. 60,000 a week in 69. That's a lot of money then.
60 grand a week in 1969.
Right. That was big money.
That's unheard of.
Yeah.
Huge money.
Yeah. And he loved that.
Wow.
But you know, yeah, you're exactly right. Over all those years, he made millions of dollars, right? But he spent it like a drunken sailor, you know. He had no business acumen at all. Whatever he would make in one given week, Angelo, it was gone by the next payday. Literally. He never had a bank account. It was all cash. And a funny thing, you know, when you could always tell when Tiny got paid? Now check this out. He would limp. You know
why?
Thank you. He would limp because just like in New York City, he said, when he was poor, right? And you could get roughed up or mugged. So if you had any money, you put it in your shoe because that's the last place they look. So if I saw Tiny limping, I knew he just got paid. And we'd sit down in the dressing room and go, oh, my leg, it hurts so much. And he'd pull out a wad of bills, you know, like this and choke a horse. How he ever walked in those shoes with that money, I'll never know. But he had that habit. He grew up that way.
That's crazy. Out of curiosity, while you were telling that story, I looked it up. Per the official U.S. Economic Bureau's inflation calculator, $60,000 in 1969 is just under $425,000 today's money.
Oh my God!
Wow, that's a lot of dough
per week.
Per week. That's the equivalent of $1.2 million a month.
And Tiny used to tell me, I mean, I wasn't with him then, of course, but Tiny used to tell me, he said, Mr. Plym, when I was at Caesars, because he'd never had this in his life, you know, he was a street urchin in New York City playing Pass the Hat, right?
Right.
Tell the song, right? He said, I had a suite all by myself, a wonderful shower. They would bring me food, anything I wanted to my room. He was just like a kid in a candy store, man. And he said, this is for me, you know?
Steven, I gotta and Dan, I'm going to throw it back to you in just a second, but I got to say, something just struck me. You just said something super important, that Tiny was a street performer.
Yeah.
How many of those performers that you've seen, known, or handled, and one very, very famous one comes to mind, it recently passed away a couple of years ago, who can't make it outside of that realm. One guy that comes to mind, I'm going to give you a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Robin Williams, the late Robin Williams.
Wow, yeah.
Started off as a street performer.
Yeah, what a genius.
And he was always of that mode. He was always a street performer.
Yeah.
And he was a man who was clearly, may he rest in peace, but he was clearly a guy who was not comfortable in his own skin for a long time. I think fame, pardon my language, but I think fame fucked with him. And I think in some regard, and I'm going to put this out there, you know better than I do, and I'm certain Dan will pick up on it, but Tiny was one of those guys too that he didn't know how, or to me anyway, he seemed like he was always uncomfortable being a big star. Am I wrong about that?
I would have to remind him sometimes, because Tiny could get very depressed. Okay.
Go ahead.
And very religious, and thank God for everything all the time. He meditated and prayed 4 or 5 times a day, every day, right? Took 5 or 6 showers a day, every day. But sometimes he'd get really down, and I can remember times more often than not, here's what worked. And I would say it in different ways, so I wasn't repeating myself, so to speak. I'd say, Tiny, look at this. When you walk in a restaurant, what's everybody do? They kiss your ass. What table do you want? What can I do for you? Oh, let me buy you dinner. Here's a drink. If you want to, everybody stops as soon as you walk in. They want your autograph. They tell you how wonderful you are. On and on and on with the adjectives and adverbs. I said, Tiny, do you think I ever get that? I'm a civilian, man. Do you think 99% of the people get what you get? You should count your lucky stars, baby. Look what you got. And you're complaining about whatever issue it was, this, or this. And I would make it more in depth than that. And he would sit there and look at me and go, Mr. Plym, oh my God. Oh, you're so right. Oh, Lord, please forgive me for complaining. But that's how I would get to just common sense. Just common sense. Tiny, look what you got. And the rest of us don't. Come on, man. It could be a lot worse, okay? Yeah. Your problem, most people wish they had your problems, baby.
Good, Dan.
You mentioned the street performer, and that got me thinking. You hear, and most of them are exaggerated because that happens all the time in the entertainment business, all these stories about people getting found, playing at a mall or outside this. How often is it that an agent or a manager finds that kind of talent? Or is that one of those 1 in a million that just gets, overly Hallmark Channel overly used tropes?
Well, from my perspective, in my history, very, very few. I mean, very, very few. I know there have been, and I've read about it, but it's not been in my experience, okay?
Stephen, there was a story, and I'm going to give it back to Dan. There was a story of Lana Turner being discovered at Schwab's drugstore.
I've heard it like everybody has.
Okay. A young girl, apparently an aspiring actress at the time, sitting there drinking a soda at the soda fountain at Schwab's drugstore in L.A. And just happened that Louis B. Mayer or one of the Metro Golden Mayer crew walked in. I think it might have been Louis B. Mayer, walked in and discovered this young lady named Lana Turner. That notion of being discovered at the soda fountain, or being discovered, playing your guitar on the street corner, that's, few and far in between, as Dan pointed out.
Oh, damn
But-
right. Remember
but-
John Wayne? John Wayne was discovered that way.
True. I forgot about that. Yeah.
He was working on the lot and a delivery guy, right?
Yeah.
As the
You're
story
right.
goes, as I remember it. And they said, I don't know who it was, but oh my God, you could be in pictures. There you go.
You
those-
know what, Stephen? I forgot about that, and you are absolutely right. Go ahead, Dan.
Okay, then to continue that narrative, well, I guess to kind of change it up a little bit as well with what you were talking about with knowing people. When you started your story, you said how you covered all the small lounge bands and everything.
Sure.
How does that? You were 21 years old. Maybe that's
Right.
a different time, but how does a young kid like that get? How would you get into the business if you're 20 years old, 18, whatever? I want to be an agent. I want to get into the. How do you do that? Do you
Well, in
just
today's
apply
world,
like a normal? Is it know somebody who knows somebody? How does that happen?
in today's world, my opinion is almost impossible. It's a whole different era. When I did, that was 1971. Okay, 71. There was no technology. You went to a lounge to enjoy yourself, get drunk, hustle a girl, and watch a band, right? Today, there's videos, there's this, all that shit went out with mud flaps and fender skirts, okay?
Okay.
I started out, see, as a singer in my own band when I was 15 years old. And that band lasted, the same cats, all through high school and through 2 years, 7 years, my band, right? And we played all over the Midwest. And we were pretty damn good in the end. And then we would open for big band, for a big act. And to open for a big show, right? Was like, oh my God, I've made it,
What was your first record, Stephen?
For what it's worth.
I knew you were going to say that. I'm going to tell you why. I actually searched you out. I found that song.
Did you?
I did.
I was
Yeah,
19.
I sure did.
19 years old. I was 19 years old. We recorded that. I was a freshman in college. We recorded that. We got all our money together. We went to Chicago, Chess Checker Cadet Studios. Remember that? Famous.
Yes,
Right.
sir.
And that's where we did it. An old Buffalo Springfield tune, and we updid it.
Yes.
That
yes.
was a tribute to my one hit.
Hey, look, at least you were a one-hit wonder. There's a lot of people that was a no-hit wonder.
I was a one-hit baby.
There you go. I got news for you. Some of the greatest songs in the world are one-hit wonders.
Oh yeah, there's
You
there's
know?
a whole history of that.
Who could forget, Terry Jack, Season in the Sun,
Yeah.
Dan's too young to know that one.
That's as an avid lover of music, I'll still admit that's before my time.
Hey, friend and lover. Friend and lover.
Yes.
Reach
There you
out
go.
in the darkness. Huh? Remember that? That was a top 10
here you
hit.
go, Dan. Terry Jacks, Seasons in the Sun. You remember that one, Stephen?
I do.
They wore the hell out of that. Almost as bad as Tiptoe Through the Tulips. So let's talk about, we're going to transition now. We're going to talk about Stephen Plym, Managing 101, Agenting 101. There are people called managing agents that do both. Colonel Tom Parker is the classic example of that. However, these people aren't getting 50% of their client's take,
Right.
like the Colonel was. But managing agents are guys that do both. Is that a slippery slope, Stephen? Do you walk a tightrope if you try to finagle, juggle both of these sometimes conflicting duties?
I wouldn't want to do it, but I've known people that have. And I think what you just said, slippery slope. You can get in trouble, whether it be on the buyer side or your agent. Where's your loyalty? You got to split it up, man. You're busting up. I like exclusivity. If I'm going to manage you, nobody else is. And then nobody can get in my way, because I'm not going to work my ass off for you and have some other guy down the line in a year or two take advantage of all the work I've done.
Daniel.
Yes, sir.
You're an aspiring showbiz agent.
Okay.
You come to Stephen M. Plym. The M stands for money. You come to Stephen
Thank
M.
or lack
and you
of.
say, Mr. Plym, I know who you are. You're famous, sir. You're one of the most talked about agents and managers in the business. I want to be just like you. Teach me what you know. What's the first thing Daniel has to ask Mr. Plym?
I have those calls even today.
I know you do. That's why I'm trying to get Dan a job.
Hey, Dan, let's go
Yes,
on the
sir.
road, babe. Let's go on the road and make it, baby. That's what we always used to say. We're going on the road, man. We're going to make it.
But I'm gonna tell you, not for nothing, but I was on there. I lived out of a suitcase for years.
So did
So
I,
Dan,
baby.
you want to be an agent. So what's the first thing you're going to? What the first piece of advice you're going to ask Stephen M. is for Money Plym? What are you going to ask this man? What do you want to know? What does he have to teach you?
Well, if I'm going to be an aspiring agent, the obvious question is, how do you go about booking your first band or first act?
Yeah, you got to get out. You got to get out in the barnyard and stomp in the shit. Search, knock on doors, and you better be tough, because baby, it ain't easy. I did it. I know a lot of guys that have. And I know a lot of guys that were very good at it, but just became so worn out, man, with it, and disenchanted with all the crap you have to put up with, and they drop like flies, just like bands drop like. I've probably handled in my life, well, thousands of bands, thousands. Talking to them, coaching them, putting them together, helping them rehearse, booking them, babysitting them, loaning them money. So they're broke. Keep your commission. I don't need it this week. Feed your guys. You know what I mean? It's a real convoluted, hairy deal. It's not, you just can't explain it in one sentence or even in that. You just got to start somewhere. If that's where your heart is, then you'll figure out if you want it bad enough, you'll figure out how to start.
Well, let me ask you then. Angelo mentioned earlier about lawyers and the old expression about a fool for a client and all. There's a certain degree of morality that you have to leave at the door in order to be a good attorney. That's true. I have friends that do this, and I'm not lying. It's so it's the same thing with managing and agenting. You hear stories about guys that basically, I'll give you all the drugs and women you want, and the second you're not making me money anymore, I'm on to a new client. Where they, you talked about the guys that made all their money treating Tiny like crap. What kind of, for lack of a better description, is it possible to be really a good manager or a good agent while still without having to abandon some semblance of moral somewhere?
Great fucking question. I am so glad he asked that.
How about politicians? What do you think they do every day? Okay, there you go. They claim to be moral, and maybe they are in most cases, but you ain't going to get nothing if you don't give up something.
Let me remind everybody.
You cannot have it your way all the time. It ain't going to happen. So yeah, you got to, I'll use the word compromise.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, Stephen, you and I remember, because we're of that generation. Yeah. You and I remember, and I remember from firsthand because I got involved in it. The payola situation. You remember?
Oh, yeah. Remember Dick Clark?
Sir. Yeah. Dick Clark. Well, it lived long past Dick Clark. And what Stephen and I are talking about, there was a chapter in American music where record companies wanted certain artists promoted or pushed, like, to equate this to the wrestling business. There are people gunning for you at the top of the roster. They want your spot. And the record companies used to have these, sometimes, most of the time, unknown artists that they would put a lot of money behind to have their records played over and over and over again on radio stations, big city radio stations, Philadelphia, New York, Los Angeles, all these big stations, Chicago. And they would have, these rally parties for these, unknown artists who create. I got sucked up into that too, because I was being given, and I'll just tell you straight up because it's past history. They were sticking $100 bills in the record sleeve, Steve.
Yeah.
And you know that.
I do know that.
Yeah. And I've got a lot of them $100 bills, brother. A lot of them. And but talk to me about, to follow up on Dan's question, and I want Dan to pursue that line of question about how you maintain your integrity, I think is what Dan's saying. Mm-hmm. How do you maintain your integrity in a basically, like wrestling, Dan, a corrupt, moralless enterprise?
Right.
I had one guiding thing with me, and it was simple. Never, ever fuck your artist. If somebody's got to go down, it ain't going to be them. So I went from there. Never, ever screwed my artist. If I had to make deals that were unseemly, I did. If I had to compromise, you want to say compromise some of my morals in different areas. I don't mean murder or something, but you know what I mean. Okay, right. I did. I admit it. Otherwise, you ain't going to play ball in the big leagues, man. You just ain't going to. But I never screwed
Steven, it happens, and I'm glad you said that, Stephen, because it happens in wrestling. Dan can tell you, it happens in wrestling all the time, brother. Oh, I mean, all the time. And that's why I think there's this, as much as the wrestling business and the music business may think they're, separate and apart from each other, there's a lot of similarities. They are kindred spirits. I got news for you. One of the things that I wanted to talk about is, and Dan had brought up the subject. I want Dan to go, because I've been not talking too much tonight. I'm not really used to that. Shut up, Daniel. I'm not used to talk. Yeah, of course. It's like him when shut him up already. Let Dan talk. But go ahead, Dan. Pursue that line.
Well, we're still talking about the shady ethical behavior, correct?
Yeah, I mean, how do you maintain, your good standing in the business?
I mean, let me give you one example. Okay. This is just one example. Okay, and I can give you many, but I'm not going to name names, of course. But okay, I used to book a lot of acts in Las Vegas on the Strip, right? Mm-hmm. Lounge acts, right?
Yes, sir.
You go through the entertainment director at the hotel. You take him out for dinner. You pay for it. You schmooze him. You buy him booze. You bring him to see your act. He says, okay, you get a deal. And then you go in the bathroom or a locker room or whatever. And he goes, when you get paid on Friday, I want 100. And you do it. Mm-hmm. Because it was pay to play.
Thank you. That's the term.
So you're basically bribing him to continue his end of the deal.
Well, he's extorting me.
Okay.
But it's different, Dan, and I'm going to interject, and because Stephen used a term, there's a difference between bribery, which is illegal, believe it or not, it's still illegal, and the difference between what's referred to, and this is a legal term, it's called pay for play.
That's right.
And it's in contracts. It's called a pay for play contract. It's legal bribery. It's essentially, Stephen, what it is. Yeah. And we both know it.
But that was the way you did it. And if you didn't do it, your act wasn't going to go on stage in Las Vegas, man.
Yeah, and even in the film business, there are, actors who became stars because of 5-picture pay-or-play deals.
You know the deal. You know the routine.
Yeah.
That was the routine. man.
Exactly.
It was the norm. It was the norm, not the exception.
Exactly.
And I'll tell you another thing. Going along those lines, guys, like major newspaper columnists, entertainment, right? Columnists. If your name was in their thing, you look big and more people come to your show, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can't tell you how many times, like if I'd have an act somewhere, I'd write the copy, take it to the guy with a $50 bill and go, print this.
Well, wait a minute now, Stephen. Let's pick up where you are because I'm going to keep you there. And it goes back to the 30s and 40s. Let's tell everybody about a woman named Hedda Hopper.
Oh God, yeah,
Let's tell everybody about Walter Winchell. Let's tell everybody about Rona Barrett, Rex Reed, Siskel and Ebert.
Oh, okay, you know them all. Yeah,
all of them. They all did the same thing.
It was the norm, man.
Exactly. They all took a little bit of green.
And you hate it, but you soon learn to accept it. It's like an insurance policy. You do that or you don't play. What am I going to tell my act? I can't get you booked. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And you know what the competition is? If you don't, somebody's right in line to take that job and pay.
Yeah.
You know?
Go ahead, Dan.
Then moving to, we just bounced on the past. I'm curious, from everything we've described to a lot of the back stuff in the modern era with streaming and digital music and everything, how has that impacted the role of the manager and the agent and the booker, where acts that are making millions of dollars might not ever play a show?
Damn, he always gets one in there that I wish the hell I'd asked. Damn it. Damn.
You know, Dan the man is too cerebral for me, man. You know, he has some really deep shit.
This is why we call him the smartest man in the room.
I believe it.
Why do you think he's got to wear a hat every episode? It's to keep his fucking brain in. You know?
I'll probably end up getting a hitman from Vegas tonight at my door.
Go ahead, you guys. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dan.
I'm sorry. What was the?
The question in the modern era with streaming and digital music and YouTube and everything, you have artists, even though you hear stories of, oh, they're only making a few cents per stream or whatever, artists that can get literally make millions of dollars without ever playing a live show. How has the modern digital age influenced the role of the manager and the booker and the agent?
Well, in some ways it's made it easier. In some ways it's made it harder. The guys that are already big and have the big acts, hey, it's just more, baby, here we go. You know, open up the cage. New cats coming along the way, they don't have the connections or the backing, right? You need money too, to acquire those kind of resources and networking. So it works either side of the street. Guys that are already big, yeah, it's just another gold mine. And it's easy street. It's an easier street. I'll put it that way.
Well, then if I can continue down that road, you mentioned earlier, Angelo, you mentioned earlier the Dick Clark era. And, you know, it was common in the record days. You guys know performers were paid peanuts and the studios owned and ran everything. It's very similar now with the streaming rights, where you'll write a song and perform it and be famous, and you might get fractions of a penny per play of that music, while the studios are making money hand over fist. We've gone full circle back to the way things were in the 50s and 60s. I'm curious, Stephen, if you have any insight on that, how it's actually harder, from what artists will say, to make it in the modern era.
Can I interject, Stephen?
Of course.
Stephen, I'll give it to you, but I want to interject because I'm going to go
thanks
there.
Thanks for interjecting, because I didn't know how to answer his damn question.
What? I'm going to go there. Here's what I think, and I think this because of what I've observed. I think, especially now in the digital age, with like Vimeo, YouTube, all of these streaming outlets where you can record your own original stuff, you've got YouTubers that are millionaires who don't have to leave their bedroom.
Right.
Okay. That they play and perform, and they do originals, and they've got sponsors. How they got sponsors and subscribers, and people are paying them.
I'll tell
I'm
Dan,
talking, Stephen, I'm talking about 17, 18-year-old kids that are like millionaires from
Yeah.
YouTube.
I'm hip to that, and I'm going to tell you something, and straight out, right?
Yeah.
I'm an old warhorse, man. I'm what you call an anachronism, something in the past, still living and functioning today. We had our way of doing it all the years. I don't know the answer to your question, Dan the Man, because the current thing that you're talking about right now, I haven't been involved in.
Okay.
So to be honest with you, I don't know, man. I know, just like Angelo said, they're all making, I don't know how it works. I do not know how all that works.
Yeah,
Well,
I
then-
don't know how it works, Dan, but I know, Dan, that they are making some serious scratch. Now, if Dan, if you go to Steven and you say, Mr. Plym, I'm a talented tap dancer. I want you to represent me. I'll bet you the first thing Stephen Plym's going to say, and I'm not going to put words in your mouth, Stephen, but the first thing you're going to tell him is, son, you got to get yourself out there, get a website, and get yourself discovered.
Exactly. Exactly. If you don't have a website today, you don't have a platform to do shit.
Talk to
That's the first
everybody,
thing,
Stephen. Talk to everybody, Stephen, about how aspiring artists, dancers, singers, actors, actresses can utilize the internet. And this is something you and Dan can talk about because he's young and hip and I'm not. So go ahead, talk. You and Dan have that conversation, and I'll drink my coffee.
All I can tell you is this, Dan. I get calls, I don't know how many a week, just because I'm out there with all my stuff and I have history. And people will call me every week, whether it's a singer, dancer, usually musicians. Will you handle me? Here's what I do. I don't take any new artists on unless they already have something going. I've done that in the past. I'm not going to start over, you know.
Right.
My advice is whatever you need to know from me, I'm an open book to you, and I would love to help you with what I know and my knowledge to help you because other people have helped me. So I can answer your questions as best I can, but then I got to tell you, if you really want this, you better get on your horse and ride, man, and you better get to New York or get to LA where the action is, because if you're not going to be seen, if you're not going to be exposed, you ain't got shit. And get yourself a website. Do you have pictures? Do you have a portfolio? What do you got so far? You know? And then you got to go out and literally knock on doors. Yeah, you can do a lot of it on the internet, but that's just bullshit because they don't even look at it. You got to persevere, man. You got to want it like you want to live, okay? Like it's your life. And you go meet people and knock on doors and here's who I am and here's my portfolio. And you just got to do it. Just recently, in the last month, I've helped 3 girls do this and go to LA from small towns. And I tell them, I said, when you go into LA, right, with your U-Haul and you're going to make it, right? If you stand in that spot long enough, you'll see that U-Haul going back somewhere.
Exactly.
That's your chances. Slim and none. Now, do you still want to do it? And if they say yeah, I say, God bless you. What do you need from me? I'll help you any way I can.
Stephen, can I ask you a question?
Yep.
Used to be a time, and Dan, you know this too, even in the wrestling business, there used to be a time that you would take your 8x10 and your tape, and you would, you know where I'm going, Stephen.
Exactly,
okay.
baby.
You know where I'm going, Dan.
Yes, sir.
And now, everybody now is, everything's digital. It's all email. It's all, now they don't send you a picture and a tape. Now they send you a link by text. Here's my YouTube. Here's my, used to be called sizzle reel. Now it's called
sizzle reel. Yeah, man.
Sizzle reel.
Right.
Now they call them.
I haven't heard that terminology in a while.
Because I'm old. That's why.
Well, so am I.
Well, it's also we've seen it, and then I had when I had Mustafa Gadalori on the roundtable about a month ago. He was telling the story. Almost every audition that's done nowadays, you don't go to a casting director. They'll put out a mass email. We're looking for, X, Y, and Z. And you say, because now it's so easy to make, people send in their own demo tapes. I've got a smartphone. I can record with this. I can record a professional quality demo reel, few minutes of me reading a line that you emailed me, and I never have to leave the house. So it becomes
exactly, Dan, what I was, and I'm thank you for going there, because that's exactly what I wanted you and Stephen to talk about. Stephen, there was a time if you wanted to be, the next big thing, you had to hire a camera crew. You had to spend money for tapes and headshots, and you had to get on the bus or take a plane or whatever the hell. You had to go crisscrossing all over the place. Now, Dan and I can sit in our living room, and people around the world can see us now.
They don't have it really anymore. Being a child of the 80s, the MTV generation, I remember every shopping mall, strip mall, and area had a shop who existed just to make music videos. Like,
exactly.
You'd bring your garage band to this place, and they would make kind of a semi-amateur, semi-professional, whatever you want to call it, music video that you could now take and distribute to people.
Yeah, I remember when I got my first Walkman in '83. Jesus, I thought it was the best thing since sliced bread.
Right.
Right.
I remember them. Now, we walk around with, like a 5 gig computer in our pocket. I get lost in my background. I have to hold my phone up.
Thousands of songs.
But but here's the thing, though. No, but you guys you're absolutely right, Stephen. I know that. I want to tell people, because I'm going to give Stephen M. Plym, the M stands for money, and his partner Jacob, because I know Jacob is in the background lurking there, running the computers and shit.
And he just went up to the bathroom. Hey, Jacob, get down here. They're talking about you.
But I want everyone to know that
Stephen Plym.
Well, he's in the right place.
Yeah,
he's in the right place. I'm talking about him. He's in the right place.
Here he is, Angelo. He's right here.
It's like I left for 2 seconds.
Stephen Plym and Jacob, his partner Jacob, they are 2 guys that you want to know. If you want to be in the business, if you think you've got the talent, get a hold of Stephen M. Plym and get a hold of Jacob. Jacob is one hell of a web designer. He is a webman. He will build you a professional, top-notch, state-of-the-art entertainment website to promote yourself like nobody's business. And when you are ready, Stephen Plym will look at you. He will assess you and size you up. And if you are lucky enough to have Stephen Plym represent you, you're going to go someplace. So, and I just wanted to throw that out there, Stephen. I know you didn't expect that tonight, but
not at all. But thanks for the plug, and thank you for your kindness.
Look, I got it. See, here's the thing: Dan and I are all about promoting the unsung hero. I know you're the face of the crew, but let's be honest about it. Jacob's the guy doing all the hard work back there.
Of course.
Not wrong. It's not wrong. I tell you.
I know I'm not wrong. Jacob, I know that. I know the deal, brother. I know the deal. Go ahead, Dan, talk.
Well, it's actually funny. Got me thinking. You were talking. You were talking earlier. You mentioned the formats. 2019 was the first year that vinyl outsold CD, first time ever since both those formats have existed. Because we're coming full circle back to vinyl. I'm curious, and this is just to go off of what you said with get a website, get your information. You won't take anybody off the street, but really, hypothetically speaking, what would it take for you to walking down the street, somebody's performing, you hear somebody in a club or whatever. What would it take for you to pick up somebody that's from scratch, nothing, zero, right off the street?
A lot of dead presidents.
A lot of dead
So if they came to you with talent and a duffel bag full of money, you'd think about it.
If they had the money.
Yeah.
Do you want me to lie to you?
No, I was genuinely curious if there's no level of talent that you hear that you would you'd be willing to do all the work.
Number one, I'm not looking, and I'm not walking down the streets. It's not in my DNA anymore to do so. I wish them all well, believe me. I wish them all well, guys. I really do.
Oh,
but
absolutely.
All those years are past me. I have my history, and now I'm doing what I do. And I usually, I go out and speak and do MC jobs, 8, 9 of them a month until this COVID thing come on, I MC live shows.
Stephen Plym, let me stop you there, Stephen, because you said something, and I want to make sure that it's fresh when I say this.
All
Stephen Plym is a master of ceremonies, skilled master of ceremonies. He is also a motivational speaker. He's a great storyteller. His tales from Hollywood will captivate you. He could talk to you for hours about the ins and outs and some things you don't know about some of your favorite artists. If you want to hire Stephen M. Plym, it's as simple as going to StephenMPlym.com.
That's it.
The M stands for money.
Angela, can I ask you a question?
Of course you can.
Will you please be my agent? I love you.
I'm pretty good that way. Absolutely. Well, look, I just put you over. It's like we call in wrestling putting somebody over, right, Dan?
Right.
The art of putting someone over.
Well, and I think we get a return on investment for the wrestling term, putting butts in the seats, because first time we had Stephen on the show and put him over, by the next show we recorded, we had something 30, 40 some new requests for the Facebook group. He brought the crowds.
Yeah, and more today, by the way, Stephen.
That makes me feel good. Seriously, that's nice. That's
11
nice
more today.
There you go.
All referred by Stephen Plym. I'm not even shitting you. Not even shitting you. Straight shoot.
Makes me feel good. Thank you.
Dan and I joke about it, but it's really the truth. We do a talk show. This is just like, wrestling just happens to creep in once in a while. But this is what we really like to do. And we're going to be doing a lot more of this. Stephen, I want to bring you back. I promised everybody 3 appearances by you. We're going to bring you back one more time. I think it was like 3 weeks. Is that what we said? About every 3 weeks or so, right?
Something like that. Yeah, whatever you want, Angela.
Okay, so we're going to bring it in 3 weeks. We're going to have one more episode with Stephen Plym, and that episode is going to be a peek behind the curtain. Stephen's going to talk about some of the people he's handled and some of the horror stories he's had to deal with, and quite frankly, he's going to tell you some of the most rewarding stuff.
I like that. That'll be fun.
About being an agent and manager. And
on that note, and I can't wait to do that segment, because a lot of these cats, interesting, were big stars and then fell, and I would pick them up in the middle. But the greatest line I ever heard, I was at the Fountain Blue in Miami Beach. I had George Burns there, right? We had dinner. And he looked at me and he said, "Hey, kid, I've been rich and I've been poor. Rich is better. Always remember that."
Exactly. Absolutely.
Yep.
Well, you guys, we have come to the end of another episode. Stephen, I can't thank you enough for joining us tonight. I will, of course, touch base with you tomorrow. Dan, what's going on in the world of Dan the Man and Twitter and all of our social stuff? What's happening?
Well, like I said, we're Facebook group, Wrestling with the Future on Facebook. We're growing every day, especially when we have awesome guests like Stephen here. We're on Twitter at Wrestling Future. That's no G, Wrestling Future. We're on Instagram, Wrestling with the Future. We have quite the social media profile. You just posted on the Facebook page. You talk about upcoming events. We've confirmed one half of the Killer Bees, somebody that we were looking forward to. We've mentioned a few times talking about. I'm sure you'll go on for future guests. So any of the breaking news of sorts for the show is always on our social media.
Absolutely. And Dan kind of gave you a little hint there. B. Brian Blair will be with us on Tuesday, September 29th. One half of the Killer Bees. He is the president and CEO of the Cauliflower Alley Club, the oldest organization in pro wrestling, the Ring of Friendship. And we are going to promote that organization. We're going to talk about Cauliflower Alley, talk about Brian's career. He's a fascinating guy. But before we get to next Tuesday, we got a humdinger, baby. Thursday night, the man who redefined wrestling, and he really, really did. He blew the lid off of kayfabe. Kayfabe died when Eddie Mansfield hit the airwaves. And Eddie Mansfield will be our guest on Thursday night. It promises to be a barn burner. He says he says to me, and I'm going to quote, Eddie Mansfield says, Angelo, we're going to have some fun, unquote. So, and I'm looking forward to it. I know Dan's looking forward to it. I hope Eddie's ready for Dan. Oh God. But we are both ready for a word from our sponsor. Let me tell you something. I want to move out the way because Stephen Plym, you don't know this, but you've got smooth balls underneath your face. Look at that. Watch this.
All right.
Look at that. Do you have sweaty balls? Volleyball, netty balls? Well, it's time to make them ready balls. The Manscaped Lawnmower 3.0 will do the job and clean your knob. Its patented no-nick head will ensure that your head functions as desired. Enter promo code Wrestling Future for 20% off. That's a generous 20% off your order. And manscaped.com and Wrestling with the Future going balls to the walls at manscaped.com. Your balls will thank you, and so will we. And on that note, for Stephen Plym, for Dan the Man Sebastiano, I'm Angelo DeCipio. Take care, everybody. Good night. Happy wrestling.
God bless, guys.